started today with the Online Safety Bill. It is no longer a bill, it is now an act. It became law yesterday. Let's just have a very brief look at what the government is saying about it. This is going to make sure that illegal content is removed, and this is the only positive out of this whole thing, because the fact that the government was forced to drop the harmful but legal aspect of this was a positive development. It's going to enforce the promises social media platforms make to users when they sign up through terms and conditions, and this is the key point. So instead of the government aiming to work out what is legal content which is harmful that they want to ban, they're basically going to require Ofcom to hassle social media platforms to make sure that the terms and conditions are followed to the letter. They are going to offer users the options to filter out content such as online abuse that they don't want to see. Well, if it was only online abuse, that might be a positive development. But of course, this is not about online abuse or child protection or terrorism content. It's about censorship, and we will maintain that analysis. So Ofcom has been made the regulator, of course, and let's just see what they had to say about this. They are going to take this responsibility as the new regulator in three main phases. So phase one, they're saying they're going to publish draft codes and guidance on their duties on the 9th of November 2023, including analysis of the cause and impacts of online harm to support services in carrying out the risk assessments, because there's a whole regulatory burden that now goes on to the various platforms. They're going to provide draft guidance on recommended processes for assessing risk. They're going to create draft codes of practice setting out what services can do to mitigate the risk of harm. And they're going to set out draft guidelines on Ofcom's approach to enforcement. They're going to run a consultation on those guidelines, and the codes of practice will then be submitted to the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, and subject to the approval there laid before Parliament. So there is going to be parliamentary oversight of this. There's still plenty of opportunity to get involved in that process. Phase two involves child safety, pornography, and the protection of women and girls. And they're saying that they are going to focus on regulated services and other interested stakeholders who will be able to read and respond to draft codes of practice related to the protection of children. And that's going to be in the spring of 2024. They're also going to consult on the analysis and causes of impacts of online harm to children, and they're going to create a draft risk assessment guidance for focusing on children's harms and so on. And then finally, phase three is about transparency, user empowerment, and other duties on categorized services. So that they're going to require companies to provide transparency reports, and this is all about how they manage their censorship regimes, how they actually adhere to their terms and conditions. So they're required to provide transparency reports that's going to provide, as they say, user empowerment tools, and they're going to enforce this operation in line with terms of service. The other aspect of phase three is the protection of certain types of journalistic content, because if, as a media organization, any media organization wants to sign up to this regulatory regime, they can do so. And then they may find that some of their content is protected, and social media companies, no matter what it says in terms and conditions and so on, will not be able to remove that content. This, of course, is all about making sure that the regulated narrative is protected, and that may be viewed as being the government narrative. So here is Dame Melanie Dawes, the chair of Ofcom. Ofcom is not a censor, she says, and our new powers are not about taking content down. Well, of course, Ofcom is not the censor. The censor is the platforms. The censor is the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters of the world. Ofcom is merely making sure that they pursue their censorship requirement as regular. That's the platform censorship requirement as rigorously as possible. So they say our job is to tackle the root causes of harm. How are they going to do that? Are they going to provide all kinds of societal change, which is going to deal with the root causes of harm?
Are they going to tackle the criminal element which is producing the harm? No, they're not. And particularly where there's a lot of money to be made out of it, it's going to continue.
Indeed. So let's bring this on, because, of course, we're talking about transparency reports. They are going to be required to issue transparency notices. So if they feel that a particular organization is not fulfilling their transparency requirements, they'll be in receipt of a transparency notice, and they'll then have to do certain things to resolve that. But I just was amused at this press release from Ofcom in February this year, talking about how they had been signing up surreptitiously, anonymously, not as Ofcom, to various platforms in order to establish what the user experience is like, with a view to informing how they enforce these transparency platforms. And of course, the other aspect that I haven't mentioned so far is the effect on end-to-end encryption. And just a quick reminder that, of course, the consultation which closed in July on the revised Investigatory Powers Act notices regime, well, we haven't had a feedback from that yet, but of course this is all about various other types of notices about making sure the government can get access to encrypted chats and so on whenever the government makes a notice. But the key point, as I'll just remind everybody, is that if they have issued a notice to, say, for example, get some information about who Brian Gerrish was speaking to at a particular time and what he might have been saying, they're not allowed to inform Brian that they've been in receipt of that notice. So the process of online safety and censorship begins now.
And let's come in at a slightly different angle. This article from The Guardian caught my eye. It's labelled Opinion BBC. The furore over the BBC's Israel-Gaza coverage shows how strong and independent it needs to be. Starving the corporation of funds has been an act of national self-harm. We can make it fit to fight digital disinformation. So the gentleman in the picture, Pat Young, chairs the British Broadcasting Challenge, which promotes discussion about UK public service broadcasting. So I was fascinated with this article and I delved into it. One of the key images that comes up is the one you can see, which they had labelled pro-Palestinian demonstrators throw paint over the BBC building. But let's get into the meat of it very quickly. It says the BBC operates under the most intense scrutiny of any media organisation in the world, and this has never been more apparent than over recent days as the world comes to terms with an unimaginable massacre in Israel and the aftermath in Gaza. Interesting language there by The Guardian, of course. A number of politicians and media outlets, most with not well-hidden agendas, have chosen to see the BBC as the issue on which to concentrate. They're right. Well, we're absolutely right. So it goes on to say the BBC is the issue because a strong, well-funded and editorial independent BBC has never been more important for an informed democracy than it is today. But the government's been stripping away funds. People have been questioning its impartiality, quite rightly. And so now we find ourselves with 30% cuts to the BBC budgets. And oh dear, there's woe. But what is this British Broadcasting Challenge that this gentleman is involved in? Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because here it is. And it's got two simple goals: to promote a wide-ranging discussion about the future of UK public service broadcasting, its potential for good, its ability to transmit truth, its institutional place at the heart of the UK, and how it can be improved for the digital age. And they want that debate in public. Well, at least that second point is of interest. But if we get into a little bit more detail about them, they say, we know facts matter, we know accountability matters, we know identity matters, we believe that how these values are transmitted matters. And then it goes on to say we're very lucky in the UK because we've got the publicly owned BBC, Channel 4, S4C, with agreed content commitments from ITV, Channel 5, Scottish Television, Ulster Television, as well as obligations on all licensed broadcasters. This ecosystem works to ensure fairness, impartiality, through its uniquely British construction, whatever that means. It covers commitments, content, arts and religions, portrayal of the nations and regions. And then by the time you get to the bottom, it's also pointing out that there's 118 billion circulating, which it says is added value to UK PLC. A lot of questions to be asked about that. And if I do this second bit very quickly here, it says that they're worried because in a fast-changing media landscape, our unique ecosystem is under threat, under funding from the proliferation of unregulated broadcasters online. This is where the fear is coming from, and from the exponential exponential growth of social media platforms from US-based streaming services shorn of any public service broadcasting obligations, from changes driven by ideology over evidence, and even from benign neglect. So it's all woe, but what are they really frightened about? Social media coming online. But they ask this question. They say, if the government has got a deliberation going on about the future of public service broadcasting, shouldn't this be available to the public? So I'm going to go with them on this point, although clearly they're in defence of the whole system in itself. And if I come to the Public Service Broadcasting Advisory Panel, which was set up here, we're talking 2020. Let's bring in a headline. Membership of the advisory panel is voluntary. An invitation from the Secretary of State, Culture, Media and Sport, and or the Minister of State for Media and Data, who will chair the panel. So it's clearly independent, Mike, as you can see. And it goes on to talk about its role and purpose. So whether the concept of public servicing broadcast is still valid, how it should conduct its affairs, how it should be regulated. But then my eye was cast to the selected people. And we've got senior advisor at BT, we've got Liberty Global, we've got Lord Grade, former chief executive of Channel 4, chairman of the BBC Board of Governors and executive chairman of ITV PLC. They're all completely independent still. And then we drop down through this selection, which I'd encourage people to look. And this one caught my eye, Sophie Turner-Lang, former CEO of Endemol Shine Group. Now, I have never heard of Endemol Shine Group, so I did a little bit of work on that. And here is a takeover of Endemol, which means that it's now the largest international content producer and distributor, 88,000 hours of multi-genre premium entertainment, most of which I've seen is very dark. And you're talking about 2.7 billion. So this is the powerhouse that's working behind closed doors with the government to talk about the future of public service broadcasting. And I think there's a lot of questions to be asked as to how this little arrangement is working.